Hi everybody, my name is Bill Sanders and this is Watch Art Sci, the art and science of watch collection. Today we're going to take a look at a Swiss-Danish company called Urban Jürgensen. And Urban Jürgensen has recently moved to a new this mansion in BNBL. They had another office and atelier somewhere else in the same area, and then they got this one. And this kind of building. Carrie Lannen has a similar kind of looking building in it. I think that for watchmakers who are trying to really dig into the past and pull out the best in all kinds of features of watchmaking, they tend to like this kind of building. Okay, now Urban Jürgensen really started in 1781 with Urban's father, whose name was Jürgen Jürgensen, and it was a company in 1781. It was called Larpent and Jürgensen. All right, now they started selling pocket watches in Copenhagen during this time. And over the years, Jürgen Jürgensen was Urban Jürgensen's father, and he traveled to Paris and he studied with Arnold in London and Breguet in Paris, and some of the other greats of that period, including Moritz Grossman. So there is a very classical kind of background that Urban Jürgensen had, and he made chronometers for the Navy, for the Danish Navy as well. And then he became they were all kinds of honors bestowed upon him. Then his sons took over, and right up into the 20th century, it was family owned. And then in the early part of the 20th century, there were no more Jürgensens to take over. They wanted to do something else. So anyway, more recently, it was sort of revived, like a lot of the watch companies were around between the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. So here we are now with a company that makes very good, very high horology watches, and we're going to take a look at them. Now, one of the things I think that's important to look at with Urban Jürgensen are the things that they emphasize. And they emphasize really four things. First of all, they emphasize what's called a detent escapement. And a detent escapement is nothing new. They were used on ships' chronometers. And one of the features of a detent escapement was that it didn't have as much friction, which would lead to two things. One, more accurate time, and those chronometers were vital for navigation back in the age of sail. And they also didn't require as much service because there wasn't as much friction to wear parts down. And if you're at sea, you can't step out to a watchmaker. All right, so the problem was, though, is that they couldn't really put it into a watch. Just let me show you a quick little animation of this. And you can see there's a single point of contact with the escape wheel instead of having the two different pallets clicking on it. There's only a single one. And this may remind you somewhat of the Daniels coaxial escapement. And it was for the same reason. They were trying to reduce the tension and the kind of contact between the different parts. All right, so if we fast forward to today and we take a look at the one that's in the Urban Jürgensen watches, they had something called the P8. The P8 was developed in concert with Chronode, and Chronode is a movement maker that makes quality movements on the order of something like Vasseur. They've made movements for CESPAC, for MB&F, for HYT. They made the Opus 10 or the Opus X for Harry Winston. And they also make them for MCT and of course, Urban Jürgensen. And what they made was the chronometer detent escapement in P8. And this was very crucial. Okay. And this was made, this wasn't something that was out on the market. And they said, oh, well, we'll buy one of those. But rather, it was made in conjunction with Urban Jürgensen. And here you can see, here's some other, you can see some of the elements of the detent escapement. Okay, so that's the first thing that I wanted to look at, and here's an example of the watch, and this watch won the Grand Prix for men, and this was, they featured the P8 movement in this one. Now I'd like to talk about the dials. I mentioned Grenache, and we're going to talk about that first. And what's done with Grenache, a couple different examples up there. I have two that are platinum or steel. That they also do it with gold watches, or gold dials too. They start off with engraving. They engrave the different markings, the hour markings, minute markings, and so forth, and of course the numbers as well. And then these are filled with lacquer. Now, once the lacquer dries, they're sanded down, and it leaves a residue in the grooves that were made with the original engraving. And then the Grenache layer is built over the step-by-step going onto it. And it's a secret mix of silver and salts and other kinds of things. And these are hand brushed on individually. And then there's an electrical chemical reaction, and the surface comes up with this pearled finish. Now, it sort of gives it a silvery, frosty look to it. Some of the dials I've seen are, they have one that's sort of a brown tan dial, beautiful dial that has the same effect. But what I liked about it, and I don't know why or how, it seems to really lift the hands off of the dial. In other words, is that you can really see the hands very clearly after this process. Plus, it looks gorgeous too on top of it. The examples that I have there, I have two different examples. One's a Grand Complication, which is extremely expensive. The other one is a reference 2340, which is it's a date and the moon phase watch. Now, the other thing too, just a quick notice, is that the reference 2340 has what I call for them the new dials, which I don't like as much as I like the teardrop miles. The one on the left has the miles, the teardrop lugs that is on the one on the left. Okay, now the next type of dial I want to take a look at is the guilloche. Now, the guilloche that they have is to me really spectacular. What they do is that they take a solid piece of silver, and they have these old machines. They're very proud of the fact that their machines some of them I think are back from the 1800s, and there's 700 different operations. And it takes two days to make a single dial with the kind of guilloche that they have. Now, I don't know if you can see it very well on your screen, but look at the bottom one. You have two different types of guilloche. The one on the outside's it's sort of like a diamond one, but on the inside they have this crosshatch pattern. It's incredible. So the guilloche they have is, which is no joke. It's quite complex and really amazing. The last type I'm going to talk about, or the third type, is the enamel. And the enamel, you may remember some of the watches we talked about. They had something called the Grand Fou, which is French for the Great Fire. And this is when things are heated up to 700 to 800 centigrade. That's really hot. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's really hot. and it heats up, and it has, they put in silica, and this silica has been ground to a fine powder and mixed in with some emulsion, and then it melts. And then on top you end up with this glass-like finish on it, really beautiful. And the transparent crystal flint is a glass fauna on top of it. That particular enameled dial took a month. It takes a month to do a single dial. Now they'll work on one, and then they'll heat it up and do what it has to do, and then do another one. And while the other one's cooling off, they'll work on another one. But I mean, it doesn't take the whole factory shuts down for a month, but it takes quite a bit of time. So the dials on the Urban Jürgensen watches, every one of them has a special finish on it. I don't think there's a single one that has just sort of like nothing special about it. They're either grenache, guilloche, or enamel. And that's a very, very special kind of dial, and it's very important to them to have that kind of dial. What I want to look at now are the lugs and the hands on the dial, and then I want to take a quick look at the other movement, what I call the other movement. The P8 is their detent movement, and we've looked at that. So I just want to take a quick look at the other one, and then some of the other ones that they may have. Okay, the first thing are these teardrop lugs. I really like them. I like lugs that are unique, and teardrop lugs. Some other watches have them, but I really like them. They're more expensive to create. They have to be soldered on to the case. They're not milled and come out like my watch. Here does, but these are very interesting lugs, and they have to match them exactly, and it's a very interesting process that they have for these lugs. Now, recently they came out with some tapered lugs, and these tapered lugs are they're cut right out of the case. They're milled. You have the case, and then they mill around, and then the lugs are left over. And most watches have that. Here are a couple, the ones I have. This one is my Culpa, Parmigiani Culpa, and has these are called horn lugs. Your teardrop lugs are probably considered a type of horn lug as well. The really interesting lugs are on my Beauvais, and here you have a bow and crown lug, and at the bottom that's called a bar lug. So I really like the teardrop lugs. These tapered lugs are fine. They're probably not going to break off, whereas the teardrop lugs, who knows? All right, the next thing I want to talk about are the hands. Now, the hands, in the two hands they have, one has a sort of a big circle at the end. There's a much bigger circle than you'll find on a Breguet or Breguet type. Some of the older Urban Jürgensen ones did have those little round ones on both hands. Now what they have here is that, notice that there's a great big zero at one end, and then the other hand is straight. But if you look carefully, the minute hand sort of is bent at the end, and so it points right to the minute indicator on the watch, and that I think is very cool. These are called pontiff hands, and if they look familiar, where you may have seen them is on vintage Omegas. All right, they have the ones with the circle and then the straight one. I don't think the big circle was as big. They're also called Observatory Hands. So they're interesting hands. They really are. I love the hands on this, on the watches that they have. Okay, the final thing I want to talk about is their P4 movement. Their P4 movement is their workhorse movement. And it's used in a lot of their watches with certain types of modules added for special functions like moon phase or something like that. But this is a real workhorse. The P8 is their detent movement. That's their contribution, you might say, to horology. But this is a nice little movement that they have, and it's not so little. It's pretty good size. It's 32 millimeter. I put a picture there at the bottom where you can see what it looks like in a 40 millimeter case, and there's a nice tight fit. It's a good size movement. I like big movements because I mean, as big as you can get them for the watch, but you can see they do a pretty good job of filling up a 40 millimeter case. And they have the Swiss lever escapement. They don't have that detent escapement that the P8 has. Now, what you will also find if you're thinking of getting an Urban Jürgensen watch, go to their website and look at the different movements that they have. The P4 is the most common one. The P8 is a detent, but they'll have some other ones. Frederic Piguet, they have some that'll have FP 71 and 1160 are a couple that they use that are Piguet. There's another one, and I'm not sure who they're by. I think it's by Claret, but I'm not positive. So the movements other than the P4 and the P8 are not in-house. But most of the ones they use are the P4 or the P8. So while there are some that are not in-house, they're good movements. The Frederic Piguet is a very good movement, and the one by, who is by, is also, I'd seen it and I remember this, they're so-and-so. So they're good movements. There are no cheap movements in here. Okay, well, I'd really like to hear what you have to say about Urban Jürgensen. I find them a very interesting company. I think the Alfred is a well-priced stainless steel model, and I think it's either on the used or the secondary market that may be even more affordable. $14,000 or 14,000 euros is for a watch like this, for a high horology watch of this caliber, I think is pretty good. Anyhow, as always, I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. So in the comments section, please leave a comment. Also, too, if you'd like to subscribe, this is an invitation to subscribe. Now, on Sunday, what we have may be a little controversial, so we'll see what happens then. Until then, this is Bill Sanders for Watch Art Sci, the art and science of watch collection.